Have Chandel joining us, and we're going to be talking about creating sales systems that consistently produce results. So, welcome to the call, Chandel.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, David. I'm super pumped. This is one of my favorite subjects.
Me too. Me too. We were just doing our planning workshop last week, and one of the themes that came out was the importance of sales. And I come from a sales background before I started this business, and I realised that a lot of people who are in business think sales is a secondary thing. And I think what was reminded of is that it needs to be sales above all else, and really just
Yeah, look,
making sure that I'd rather have a problem of not being able to deliver than not having enough clients.
yeah, look, I think it is a juggle because we've got to have the reputation, we've got to have the promise that we're delivering from a sales perspective. But if
Yeah.
there's no one to deliver to, then we've got that challenge for sure. So,
So the topic today is creating a sales system that easily produces or consistently produces results. And I know that you're a sales trainer. You've been doing this for many, many years. And I'm a big advocate of getting sales systems in place. So let's talk a bit about this idea of, why? Why would I need a sales system that's consistently producing results for me?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really good question because often what we see is that people get into business. They obviously have a passion. Lots of people who are technicians, they're technically brilliant at the thing that they do, and when they're first starting out, they find kind of this intuitive process of creating sales in their business and getting client and market share.
Yeah,
One of the challenges though is as we start to grow and the business expands, is that one of the common problems that we see is that a lot of founders, a lot of business owners, a lot of CEOs, they have all of the knowledge of how to do that process in their head, and it's very intuitive. And so, when they want to bring on a salesperson or expand a sales team, they have challenges with the consistency of the results, the way in which they engage with prospects
yeah,
and the market. And so, a system is so important to ensure the integrity of the way that you want to engage with your market and
yeah,
to make sure that we've got steps to produce consistent results.
yeah, yeah. Because I know for most people, the owner of the business is the best salesperson.
Often,
And
yes.
that sort of becomes a double-edged sword, right? Because the best salesperson also means the only salesperson in a lot of cases, because you don't want to burn leads. Okay. And
No,
I think as they grow, they start to realize, look, I'm better off being in sales than other areas of the business, but that's still a bottleneck. Okay. So how
absolutely.
do we start to systemize sales? And I suppose the next piece of this formula today is one of the reasons we create a sales system is to get the owner to be not the bottleneck for the business.
Exactly.
The second reason, I guess, is to be able to scale. But
Mhm.
so when we talk about sales systems, what are we actually talking about?
Look, I think a lot of people make the get confused between our sales and marketing, and so I think the sales system is really incorporating how do we market ourselves and take ourselves to market. I often say that marketing is bringing people to the door, sales is helping them walk through it, and so we often will make systems around how we generate leads, or
Mm,
whether that's through different channels, marketing, or online initiatives or ads or things like that. But then often, the inquiry comes, and as you said before, the business owner is often the bottleneck, and they're the ones that kind of handle all of that stuff. And so, what is the process that when someone is a suspect or a prospect in your business, how do we then turn them into someone
mm,
who's qualified to work with us? How do we then nurture them through that sales process all the way through to agreements signed and payments made, and
yeah,
then that onboarding and transferring of rapport to the people who are actually going to deliver the product or service. So
yeah,
what are the steps that make that happen, and how can we create some systems around that so that it's consistent?
yeah. And look, I suppose the other thing, and when I think back, I've been in sales probably for 35 years, and in the good old days, always people always say face to face beats everything else, and sure does. But
Yes.
what we noticed is that we now have video,
Yes.
and so we've got this availability to not just live stream like this, but we've also got the ability to record video.
Mm.
So this owner
Yes.
who's so good at telling the story can be recorded and inserted into a workflow, which means they don't
Mm.
actually need to be there for every step of the way.
Yes.
The other thing we can do is obviously, and this is probably more recently, is telephone systems are integrated into CRMs, and
Hmm.
SMS, telephone, LinkedIn Messenger, email are all coming through one channel now. which means we can communicate with people on multiple channels, but have a single conversation. And
Yes.
so with this technology, what it does is it actually makes it a bit easier to systemize the sales process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really important point. A few years back, they had the Google ZMOT study, where we learned that, in order for, assessing buyers' behavior, that we needed, 7 hours, 11 touch points over 4 different platforms. And if you're one business owner that's doing the lion's share of the sales and you're the bottleneck of the business, then that's a lot of extra touch points and things. So I think the point that you made around automation and including technology and really, being able to build that relationship without necessarily having to be there for every single touch point. That's an important part of the sales process. And, I think there's a couple of different ways that we can look at this too, David. We're either, looking at scale by bringing on a salesperson or, leveraging our sales team to be able to, multiply and do the same function that the business owner or the head salesperson was doing. Or there's that option of actually looking and saying, well, how do we, take all the different touch points and the person comes in and does the heart surgeon work, if you like, like the heart surgeon coming in and they don't do the prep for the surgery, they don't do all the other things that come with it. And so there's lots of different ways that we can create systems around sales, and it could be a combination of people contact and conversation and relationship building, as well as some of those touch points that build trust and certainty along the way.
Yeah, because I think like fundamentally sales hasn't changed over the ages, has it? And
not really.
one of my favorite definitions, because those people who are scared of sales and they go, "Oh, I don't like sales; they're too salesy salespeople." I say, look, just change it to customer service instead of sales. And instead of thinking of a salesperson as a person bashing down doors and closing sales, think of them as someone who professionally helps someone buy. Yes. Now, when you think about it, no one likes getting sold to, right? Everyone likes to buy. And so when we create process, a lot of the confusion around, and you touched on this point with marketing versus sales. So in the good old days, marketing was the printed stuff that you put in the letterboxes or in the newspaper, and sales was when the phone rang, and that was it. And so you're either print, telephone, or face-to-face. And we thought, wow, 3 channels, that's pretty complicated. And now we've got probably over 100, right? And really those lines are blurred. And this is exciting for me because I look at it and say, well, now we can do the sales on a video without even being awake. And we can do the qualification on a form on a website, in the middle of the night. And people can book times in my calendar without me having to say, am I available, not available? So everything has now been sort of supported by this automation. But I think when you talk about creating sales systems and producing consistent results, what do you see are the key elements?
Look, it's a good point that you make, and while I'm absolutely an advocate for all of those extra touch points, and I think you were absolutely right on when you said that people don't want to be sold to. But one of the things that we do know is that people do want to buy in, and so that we need to create a system or a journey that allows people to do just that, so that they can buy in at different steps and different points in the way, and have those different touch points. And I think some of the key fundamental things is working out how you want to be represented. And, these are the fundamentals that come back to, who's your niche? What does your audience, what are they looking for? What are the channels that, they engage with? What are some of those things? But also thinking about you as a brand, you as an organization, how do you want for your customer to have that experience? And that's kind of like the first step of like working out what mix of automation as well as, questions and relationship building, or maybe discovery meetings, or do you need to put together proposals for long form sales deals, etc. So, I think working out what are some of the key touch points along the journey then gives you an idea around, which elements are going to be, potentially face to face and an interactive discussion, exploratory, painting tools and or painting value propositions and understanding that you're meeting the needs of your prospect or buyer. And then which elements of that can you streamline and automate? And, one of the points, and I teach this in some of the trainings that we run, is one of the points that I make is that automation is a fabulous way of being able to leverage, especially if you're a bottleneck in a business. And often people don't spend enough time up the front to work out, well, what works first before they try to automate it. So that would be my only caveat caveat on that. Like, figure out what are the steps before you start adding all these platforms and programs
Yeah.
and things like that. If you don't know what the journey looks like, those milestones along the way. So that's another important key factor.
Yeah. So really what you're saying is that automation is a support mechanism to a good sales process. It's not a
100%.
replacement. Yeah.
Yes,
And I think
exactly.
you're right. I think you touched on a couple of points there. And one was understanding the moments or the interactions
Yes.
that people are having, right? Because I think when we talk about client experience and we say, look, our clients have to have great experience when they buy from us. Well, our prospects have to have a great experience from the minute they think about us. The perception and the visuals and the connection and the speed are all elements that actually help people build rapport. Because I think any sales process has a know, like, and trust sort of phase. And we used to do this by building rapport. You know, you make sure that when you talk to someone, you talk about their kids or you talk about their sport or their habits. Online, we have less of this direct connection, but what we have is broader reach. So I think when we talk about getting consistently producing results through a sales system, is part of it understanding that there is definitely multiple steps that occur within your sales process and having a way of managing so that you know where people are at and what they need at that point in time.
100%. And one point that I'll make on that, David, is that, you know, when we have those multiple touch points along the journey, or milestones, as I call them, you know, it's about, you know, my book, Confident Closing, I talk about the fact that the close is not always just closing the sale. A close happens at every interaction. So, for example, like you said, you know, they need to be engaged from the moment that they start thinking about us. So what's the close from inquiry to then the next step? What's that next step? Does it look like a touch-based phone call, or does it look like, you know, a white paper or something that's sent out, followed up by the next step as being, you know, booking in for a call, or, you know, so there's all these different milestones and touch points along the way. And most importantly, you know, getting that close at each stage. And then the next element of that I think is really important, which you sort of alluded to, which I'll say a bit more specifically, is that how do we measure the interaction and the follow through at each of those steps? So, for example, I've worked with a lot of people who, you know, think that they're not a good salesperson, or they have what I call the itty bitty shitty committee. They're the group of people that sit on the shoulder and tell you why sales is bad or why you can't be successful, or all those beliefs that are untrue. And, you know, one of the things that they often say is that, you know, I'm not a good salesperson. And what they're doing is they're measuring a prospect against someone who signed a contract and they had one touch point with them. And we know that in today's society that, you know, especially if we're doing high ticket sales and, you know, it's a large contract value that you're selling, that one touch point is not an effective sales process to be able to build the depth of trust and rapport and the certainty that you can deliver. So I think it's also measurement is one of the key factors. And I know that you're a big fan of this, you know, in the work that you do with your clients, that often the numbers don't lie, but they're also, success leaves clues and mistakes leave clues, in the sense that if we're measuring each step of that journey or each of those milestones along the journey, we can start to identify, well, where are we not closing? So is it from prospect to qualification? Is it from qualification to proposal? Is it from proposal to contract and terms? Or is it from contract and terms to actually, you know, getting them onboarded and, you know, making their payments? So I think that measurement helps to give us insight and confidence around what do we need to add to that sales process. And I'll give you a quick example. I had a client that I worked with, and you know, she had heaps of inquiry from lots of referrals. She did great work, but she was spending, you know, about 6 meetings with people and doing a lot of work instead of actually selling the product. She was selling by demonstration, I call it. So she was doing unpaid work to try and sell the client. And then at the end of that, sometimes she'd only get, you know, one client out of maybe 10 or 15 inquiries. And it was a lot of hard labor. And so what we inserted was a simple qualification process to be able to decide whether that person was going to be an ideal client for her, saving her a lot of time and energy. So sometimes that measurement helps us to figure out where's the gaps.
Yeah, so 2 things you brought up there which are sort of really important. And one of them is we keep talking about closing in sales like it's a finality.
Yes,
and
exactly.
The truth of the matter in sales is you've got multiple close points, and really all a close is moving person from one stage to the next. So multiple
Correct.
conversions, right? And
Yes.
I think like when we talk about owners doing sales, one of the problems is it's really hard for them to switch hats between delivery and sales. So they start
Absolutely.
delivering and assume that since the client is consuming that they're going to buy. But the
Hmm.
reality is they're now just doing work for free. And there
Exactly.
needs to be a very definitive, this is where I stop and this is where I change hats from sales to delivery. And that to me is
Yes.
the final, purchase order or the close point. But prior to that,
Yes.
it's not just about, because, we have a lot of challenges or arguments with clients who say, I just need to close more sales. And
Hmm.
you say, well, what do you mean? Well, the people that I'm closing aren't responding to my requests. They're not. And I said, well, they're probably not interested. What do you mean they're not interested? I need a technique to close them. But they haven't even been qualified properly. You haven't got them through the first part of the journey and you're trying to get money out of their bank account. Doesn't make any
Yes.
sense. So we
Yeah.
talk about closing and the assumption is there's only one close. There's the end, right?
Yeah.
And you just touched on it there. And I think when people have a sales process, they need to have a close for every stage. Okay, so
Absolutely.
if I send you an email, the close is that you click the link and reply. And then when I get the reply, the close is I open a new conversation and we try and get you to the next stage, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as you mentioned, as soon as we break it down into those steps, we can work out which piece isn't closing. Because when
Yes.
someone ghosts you, when everyone says, "Oh, I've got these prospects," and I send them a proposal, and then they ghost me, and I go,
Yeah.
"Yeah," and they go, "How do I get them to respond?" And I say, "Well, chances are you didn't lose them when you sent the proposal; you lost them before you sent the proposal. That was
Yeah.
just a way of getting you off the call, right?" And
Yeah.
so this whole idea of breaking the sales process down into multiple steps. How many steps does the average sales process need to have?
Look, I think it really depends on the industry, but it generally will be, anywhere between sort of 5 and 9 steps.
Yeah.
If you find, and actually, I'll make one final point on the closing at every step uh, that you made before, is that
Mhm.
I think even when we step into delivery,
Yeah.
there should be an element of selling in every engagement that we have with the client, because, and we see this with people who have like subscription type services,
Yeah.
or if people are on retainers, etc.
Yeah.
One of the challenges is that the sale gets made and then we enter into delivery, but unless we're continually pitching and showcasing the value that we're offering and reselling the client into the investment that they're making every step of the way,
Yeah.
then we're probably going to have, they'll run out of future, or they'll start to think, well, we've got what we need now, we're moving on.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important, that
Yeah.
every interaction has an element of sales. And David, one of the things that I say is that there are 3 important sales that we make, and everyone's in sales even if they're not a salesperson. And the second sale, the sale of influence, where we convince on our ideas, is
Yeah.
actually a very important sale too. So I think there's an element in sales in every conversation we have with prospects and clients who are already sold.
So give us the three. You just mentioned two. What are the three?
Yes. So okay, so at Life Puzzle we say that sales is the number one life skill, and the first sale that we make out of the 3 is the sale we make to ourselves, about our worth, our value,
Yeah.
our ability to show up, our
Yeah.
confidence in our offering,
Hmm.
etc. If we don't nail that sale, then the other 2 are almost lost from there.
Yeah.
And so the second sale is the sale of influence, and we can have influential conversations even when money doesn't change hands. So for any parents that are watching,
Mm.
the sale of getting your kid to bed at the time you want them to go, that is a sales conversation. Or re-enrolling someone after you've, from an operational perspective, if you've let them down,
Yeah.
re-enrolling them and influencing them, that may
Mm.
not be a monetary conversation or a sale as such, but it is an influential
Yeah.
conversation. And then of course there's the transactional sale, the one we all know, where we present the offering in exchange for money and time, and and getting a return on investment as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. And then the last thing that you touched on before is that you're always in sales, right?
Yes.
And so clients who are buying from you have to buy again to optimize
Yes.
profitability. So customer
Yes.
service is sales,
Hmm.
delivery is sales, marketing is sales,
Correct. Correct.
reception is sales, coffee is
Yes.
sales. Basically, every
Yeah.
part of your business has a sales element to it, and that sales element is making sure that the client feels they made the right choice with you.
Hmm.
It's not just about the quality of the product; it's about the quality of the experience.
Yes.
So I
Exactly.
think the message I'm getting out of today is pretty clear. You need to have at least a 7 to 9 step sales process to get people in the front door in the first place.
Yes.
And if you can't break it down to 7 to 9 steps, you're probably missing something. And usually, unless you have no problem with sales, right? In which case you don't need to break it down. But what I find is people say, well, I don't need to sell. I've got more work than I can handle.
Yes.
Interesting. What do you mean? Well, we get all our work from word of mouth or referral, so we don't need to sell. We just, we're like a checkout chick at the supermarket. They just take the orders like the money comes in. That's great.
Yes.
But if you want to grow the business, how do you go about it? Oh, well, we don't need to, because it's all referral. And I see it as a high risk situation, because really
Right.
sales and marketing to me do two things, right? They generate new business, but they also help us charge more for what we do. And so
Yeah.
make our brand of higher quality.
Yes.
Because sometimes the sale isn't about will you buy from me or not. The sale is, why should I pay more for your service than your competitor's service? And
Yes.
if your sales process is not good, you'll end up discounting. So people who are in a price competitive market inevitably do not communicate value effectively, which is what sales is.
Yeah, I agree. And look, we often talk about when we're teaching our sales training, we often talk about the contrast frame.
Yeah.
So a lot of people do comparison instead of doing contrast frame. And exactly as you said, if we're not communicating the value effectively, then what happens is we look expensive. And often when people do competitor analysis, or they look at what are your competitors doing, they don't generally compare apples with apples. So they label the service as to what they think it is.
Yeah.
They put it in a box, and then they look at your pricing and then compare it to someone else who may not be doing anything like what your promise is, and they say, oh well, this is the cheaper one, I'll go with that one. And so we talk about contrast frame. And so if I stack the value of what the offering is really high,
Yeah.
and the person can see that value proposition, then by comparison the investment that they're making looks low. Whereas if I don't do that well enough, then the scales tip and we look expensive for what it is that
They
we're
need
going
to
to.
think
And I think
about
that's
it, or they can't afford to do it right now, and then all we get to
exactly.
the objections, right?
Exactly. And on that, I think this climate that we're in now more than ever, it's most important for you to be confident that you are projecting the value proposition in the eyes of the client
Yeah.
based on what they need right now.
Mm.
And if we're one of the things that I do say, you mentioned objections. One of the things that I do say time and time again is that objection is not rejection. It's simply a cry for information. And if people are objecting, it means that we haven't done a good enough job of educating and informing them, and also giving them the value proposition that makes sense to them.
Yeah, it's a good take. For me, I always look at objections as as selling opportunities, because no one's going to
100%.
they don't care, right? So if they say I want to think about it, what they're telling you is you haven't convinced me, right? If
Correct.
they say I'll get back to you tomorrow, what they're saying is I am not sold, right? So I just look at all objections as the answer is no, based on the current information. But the fact that they're giving you the objection is saying, I'm giving you the opportunity to respond here. And if you don't have the right response, it's over. So
Exactly.
even non-communication is the same. So I think there's an interesting piece to this conversation, which is really, if you break your sales process down into individual steps, it becomes a lot easier to do.
Yeah.
Right. And probably the metaphor I'd use is, if you get a jigsaw puzzle and I throw all the pieces on the table, and then I take away the box, so you have no picture to follow, you can still put it together, but it's a lot harder, right?
It will take much more time. Yes, 100%.
Yeah. So if you've got a model to follow, which is your sales process, you're not reading scripts on a phone. You're literally saying, I have a model to follow to make sure that I've covered all the objections. I've made sure I've demonstrated the value. I've shown you how it's a good sort of price point for what it is, and I've shown you how it's going to help you solve your problem. Now, if I do all that, I'm helping you buy, I'm not selling.
Yeah, 100%. And like I said before, we often say that people don't want to be sold to anyway, but they do want a reason to buy in. And so by undertaking those steps that you mentioned and making it simple and easy and consistent for you to follow, you're also creating a really comfortable experience for that person to buy in. You're giving them a reason that it makes sense to them.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Look, being mindful of time, we're just about done, but what I'd like you to do is wrap up with some summary. So if we talk about this topic, creating sales systems that consistently produce results, what would you consider the 3 most important elements?
Look, I think that everything comes down to the fact that we're still dealing with humans, and one of the points that I didn't mention today is that people buy emotionally and then justify logically. So whenever considering the sales journey, I think it's really important to actually consider what is the experience for the client. Is it going to give them, some kind of experience that not only makes sense to them, that's logical, that's factual, but it also, speaks to something, whether it's a pain or a gain, or whether it's about experiencing an emotion or a feeling that they haven't been able to get so far. So start with that and explore your niche from that perspective. The next thing is to make sure that you actually have those milestones along the way, and that you're measuring those things, because if you don't measure them, you won't know whether they're working or not, and you could be doing a step that you don't need to, which is extra work that doesn't really make that much of a difference, or you might be missing a very important step that's hurting your results. So have a look at that from that perspective.
Gotcha.
And even if you have a lot of sales and you get a lot of referrals and things like that, or maybe you're not planning on expanding your sales team right now, so you might be thinking this is not for you. I think it's still important, even if you're a solo hero, it's important to develop this system, because you start to reduce the bottlenecks. You start to create that growth and scale with the clients that you really want to work with, as opposed to kind of like anybody that has a pulse that inquires with you, they could be a client. And I say that with a lot of love and respect. It's about working with the clients that you really want to, for premium pricing, and I think you touched on that before. So even if it's working really well, one of the most important things that you could do as the third thing is to make sure that you're reviewing your sales process on a regular basis, to make sure that it still fits where you want to be in the market, and what stage of the business life cycle you're at, and what your goals and your aspirations are. So, sales is perennial. It'll always be a thing that you need to look at in your business. You want to do it with conscious intention, and make sure that you're achieving more by doing less.
Yeah, fantastic. Geez, you summarised that really well.
Thank you.
I just as an aside of all of this is, when I was in my role in sales, when I was actually a salesperson, one of the main reasons I loved it as a job is it's like having a business within a business. And the individual salesperson can take this whole strategy on themselves without even consulting with the place they work, as long as they've got some sort of latitude, right? Because a salesperson gets paid on performance, not on hours. And for a salesperson to increase their value, they just need to increase their capacity or capability to sell. And so I used to go to my own sales trainings that the company never paid for. I paid for them. And all of the people I worked with said, "What? Are they sending you on that?" I said, "No, I'm going."
I can relate. I did the same thing.
Yeah, and what I realized is the more you learn, the more you earn. So why would I wait for them? Because they're going to put me in sort of their system. And really, I just want to break away from that. So when we talk about this whole idea of creating sales systems, this is not just for business owners. This is for anybody. And even if you're not in sales, because your ability to communicate will help you get, pay rises, negotiate deals, contracts, get people doing stuff, as you said, getting the kids to bed. Everything, right? Because sales is not necessarily about dollars. It's about influence. And you sort of kept on that well. So really interesting. Look, a lot of stuff here. Obviously, if people want to find out more about your book, they can find you through your name, Chandel Lebozetta. They can find that there. They can see you all over the world and grab that, or they can just reach out to us and we'll make the connection. So look, really wanted to thank you for your time today. That's been awesome. We can go for hours on this, but I think people have to
I'm sure we could. As a final note, if anybody wants a copy of my book and they reach out to you, then we'll make sure that we get that as a gift for your audience. Anyone who's watching this that would like that, then we can organise an audio copy of the book as a gift from me. And just to highlight that, I think it's a really nice point to finish on. When I first wrote the book, Confident Closing: Sales Secrets That Grow a Business by 400%, How They Can Work for You, I wanted to call it Feeding Salt to Horses. And it speaks to the point that you made about influence, because we've all heard the saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But if you feed it salt, by the time you present it with the water, it'll be thirsty and it'll drink. And so, for anyone who still has like some of those icky feelings around sales, I think, what David said about, serving and customer service, switch that in your mind and realize that if you find the right bits of salt, that by the time you make your offer, people will be thirsty. It's a no-brainer. It just makes sense for them to say yes. So, good luck with the sales endeavors. And it's been so awesome speaking to you today, David.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chandel. And once again, thanks again for your time. And if people need help, they know where to find you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.